E1. And in the summer of 1997, Wolfgang Petersen gave Harrison Ford a Medal of Honor, a hijacked plane, and a working escape pod that he had no intention of using. The president flies to Moscow, announces that the United States is done negotiating with terrorists, and then has to back that up about 4 hours later when a crew of ultra-nationalists hijacks his plane on the way home. Everyone assumes he punched out the moment things got hairy. He's in the cargo hold, and he disagrees. Gary Oldman plays Koronov, a man who never needs to raise his voice because, well, the gun does it for him. Glenn Close held the Situation Room together as Vice President Bennett. Dean Stockwell spent the film trying to take it apart, and Xander Berkeley made one decision in Act 1 that the rest of the film existed to collect on. Today, we're going to count down 15 weird facts about Air Force One. And stick around for number 1, because Gary Oldman's real birthday has been sitting in the villain's fake identity document since opening weekend. Alright, before we begin, hit that like button and subscribe. Yeah, I know James Marshall refused the escape pod. You could refuse the subscribe button, but why wouldn't you hit it? Alright, get off my plane. Let's go. Number 15. There's a gate in Ohio attached to nothing. For shots of General Radek's Russian prison, the production needed a place that already looked like the government was sitting on top of you. They found it in Mansfield, Ohio. The Ohio State Reformatory, a Victorian Gothic prison that closed in 1990 and got bought by a preservation society for a single dollar, had already done time, actually, as a prison 3 years earlier in Shawshank Redemption. The interiors came from the West Cell Block in the Central Guard Room. For the establishing shot, the crew built something that wasn't there. A massive stone entrance gate with walls running off on both sides. All from scratch. When filming wrap, they tore the set back down. The walls came down, but the gate stayed. So, 2 monumental stone pillars planted in the middle of the reformatory, grounds attached to nothing, explaining nothing. The site pulls in more than 120,000 visitors a year. Certainly many of them are for Shawshank, but there's a lot of haunted, spooky stuff that goes on there, too. It's worth a look. I've been once. Anyways, most walk right past the Air Force One gate and don't even realize that it belongs to a different movie. It's been standing there since 1997. Nobody's come back for it. Number 14. Kevin Costner handed Ford the keys and drove himself off a cliff. The role was written for Kevin Costner, but he passed on it to direct, produce, and star in The Postman. And on his way out, he did something that Hollywood almost never does. He recommended Harrison Ford to replace him. Ford later said as much, pointing out that actors don't usually hand each other apart like that. Here's how the two bets aged. The Postman opened Christmas Day of 1997, co-st about 80 million, and pulled in roughly 17.6 million domestic, and about 30 million worldwide. Then it swept the Razzies. Worst Picture, Worst Director, Worst Actor, Worst Screenplay, Worst Original Song, 5 nominations and 5 wins. The first movie ever to lose every Razzie that it was up for. The screenplay win came with an asterisk, though, because co-writer Brian Helgeland had a busy year. The same night the Razzies handed him Worst Screenplay for The Postman. The Oscars handed him Best Screenplay for L.A. Confidential. Brian Helgeland and Curtis Hanson, applause, for L.A. Confidential. Same writer, same season, and 2 awards that could not possibly disagree harder. Air Force One opened that July and became one of the biggest hits of the year and cleared 300 million worldwide. So Costner talked Ford onto a rocket and then spent his own Christmas explaining to America why the future needed a mailman. Number 13. The most iconic plane in film history was built from CNN. Wolfgang Petersen made Das Boot. He built U-Boot interiors so tight and so convincing that his own crew got seasick standing inside a Munich soundstage. So when it came time to build Air Force One, the man wanted blueprints. But the U.S. government, yeah, you can guess they had other ideas. Nobody was going to hand over the floor plan to one of the most secure aircraft on the planet. No, the most secure aircraft on the planet, so a movie could redecorate it. So Petersen turned on CNN. Working off news footage, his design team built every interior in the film from scratch. The conference room, the comm center, the presidential cabin, the cargo hold that the whole movie basically lives in. where one room sits in relation to the next, how many decks there are, how you get between them. All of it is an educated guess dressed up as a government aircraft. Ford eventually pulled a personal favor and got the crew aboard the actual plane. Peterson, cinematographer Michael Balhose, and production designer William Sandel made the trip and came back with carpet patterns, curtain fabric, and wood paneling, not the layout. Peterson later joked that future administrations would watch the thing and start bolting new gadgets and a rear parachute ramp onto the real plane, and nobody's entirely sure that he was wrong. Number 12. Ford made one phone call, and then Clinton picked up. Peterson put in a formal request to tour the real Air Force One. As we just mentioned, the government said no, but once Harrison Ford got involved, the whole thing solved itself at a birthday party. Ford has told the story himself. He's at a party for the president in Jackson Hole, and he spots Bill Clinton and Glenn Close sitting next to each other. So, he works the room. He asks Close to play the vice president, a part written for a woman. And in that same stretch of small talk, he asks the President of the United States if he'd mind arranging a tour of his plane for the film crew. 2 asks and 2 yes, 1 cocktail party. The studio got a polite no, but a guy named Indiana Jones, he got a guided walkthrough. The better part came after the film was finished. Clinton ran it in the White House screening room and then ran it again. A movie where his own aircraft gets stormed by terrorists shot full of holes and then nearly dropped into the Caspian Sea. But he sat through the whole thing twice and gave it a pretty good review. The man watched his plane get destroyed on screen and came back for seconds. No notes. Number 11. The movie's most important gadget came from another film. The presidential escape pod is one of the more iconic things about Air Force One. It's also entirely made up. Screenwriter Andrew Marlowe invented it, lifting the idea from John Carpenter's Escape from New York, where the president's plane goes down over Manhattan, and he bails out in a pod before the movie even really starts. Marlowe took that and flipped it. What if the president could leave and did it? That single choice is the hinge that the whole movie swings on. The escape pod sells everyone, the terrorists included, on the idea that Marshall is gone, which is the only reason that he can run a one-man war from his own cargo hold. Pull that one borrowed gadget out, and the entire premise falls on the floor. Escape from New York is the story of a president who gets out. Air Force One is the story of a president who won't. Everything good in it lives in that one-word difference. Number 10. The plane that threw a 12-hour tantrum. The plane playing Air Force One had a past. It was the 54th 747 Boeing ever built. The filmmakers constructed a full-scale section of a 747 fuselage. Music fresh off the line in 1970, flying for Japan Airlines before it spent its middle age hauling cargo for an outfit founded by Connie Kala, a former drag racing champion. So, the jet doing presidential cosplay was a retired Japanese airliner run by a guy who used to race cars for a living. We're off to a great start. But here's the thing about a 747's wheels. The rims have metal plugs built in that melt when the tires get a little too hot, letting the air out in a controlled way so the wheel doesn't fail outright. It's a clever fail-safe for a plane being overworked in the sky. It's not a thing that's supposed to go off on a movie shoot, but the aerial sequences meant running the same brutal routine over and over. High-speed passes, hard braking, taxi back, do it again. Now on camera. The plane looked even faster than it was since the crew undercranked the footage to juice the speed. But the tires, well, they didn't care how it looked on film. One morning at Rick Anbacher International Airport in Columbus, Ohio, they pushed it too far. The plugs melted, the tires went flat, and this happened at 6 o'clock in the morning. So it took until 6 o'clock that night to cool the thing down, swap everything out, and get it airworthy again. 12 hours, courtesy of a jet that decided, I'm not working today. Number 9. The dummy who couldn't keep his clothes on. The zipline rescue at the end looks like real stunt work at real altitude. It's not pulling it off meant flying 3 planes together that had no business in the same patch of sky. A 747, an MC-130 Combat Talon turboprop, and a World War II B-25 Mitchell running as the camera ship. The 747 normally cruises north of 600 miles per hour. To make the formation work, pilot Paul Bishop dropped it down to about 200 with the flaps out, crawling along next to the C-130 that's very happy at 350, and AB-25 that can manage maybe 230 on a good day. Bishop flew it tight off the talon and took his cues from the camera crew in the Mitchell. They spent almost 2 weeks out by the Channel Islands, taking off before dawn every morning, hunting for a break in the coastal murk so the cameras could actually see ocean. For the wide shots, somebody needed to be on that cable. So the crew built a man-shaped dummy, dressed him in a suit and tie. They named him Felix, and then trailed him out of the back of the MC-130. On the pass, the 747's bow wave got hold of him. First the tie went, and then the jacket, and then Bishop's main concern on the radio was that his loose wardrobe would get sucked into the No. 2 engine. They reeled Felix in and scrapped him. So every human figure in that whole sequence was added by a computer afterward. Felix was the only real body ever sent out on that line, and he's the one that nobody ever sees. Number 8. The vice president's wig was Glenn Close's own. Glenn Close wasn't the original plan for Air Force One, and she showed up with a problem. Her hair was too short for the part, and there was no time to do anything official about it. So she went home, dug through her own wig collection, picked one, and then wore it to play the Vice President of the United States. She brought one other thing to set, a flat no. The script had a scene where Bennett breaks down crying at the crisis table, and Close wasn't having it. Her reasoning, in her own words, was that it would do women a disservice to drop in that cliché moment, and that her vice president wouldn't crumble. She'd step up. They cut it. What's left is simply a woman who refuses to fold. Bennett won't sign off on the move to declare Marshall unfit and hand the presidency to the defense secretary. And she doesn't soften the refusal to make anyone comfortable. A composed, unshakable female VP anchoring a summer blockbuster that certainly wasn't something audiences saw much of in 1997. Close pushed the character past what was on the page. Peterson let her. She turned up late in her own wig, talked a scene out of the script, and then walked away with one of the steadiest performances in the whole movie. All right, quick pause. Harrison Ford or Kevin Costner? Who made the right call in 1997? Drop your answer in the comments. You know the right one. And if you know someone who would choose the Postman, send them this video immediately. And like and subscribe if you've been enjoying the flight. It helps YouTube find more people who still use Get Off My Plane in daily conversation. All right, back to the cargo hold. Number 7. Ford asked Oldman to stop pulling the punches. In the fight aboard the plane Korsov against Marshall, Ford gave his co-star one note. Quit pulling them. Hit me for real. The contact in that sequence isn't movie magic. Gary Oldman is actually connecting with Harrison Ford, meaning that Indiana Jones is taking real shots from the guy who played Dracula. Oldman, by every account, wasn't thrilled about clocking a 54-year-old screen legend in the face, but Ford wanted the realism, so he went along with it. Off camera, the menace evaporated. Peterson took to calling the shoot Air Force fun because Oldman spent the gaps between takes doing bits, cracking Ford up, and entertaining the whole crew. Then flipping back to stone cold the instant that someone called action. The switch was so clean that the set started calling him Scary Gary. Ford has since named him his favorite on-screen nemesis, and the rare villain who would make every scene they shared feel genuinely dangerous. That's the trick of the performance. On screen, there ain't nothing warm underneath the threat of it all, but off it by every witness. He was the warmest guy in the room. Number 6. Ford kept the suits, and he's still using the line. Ford walked off the production with 3 suits. The presidential wardrobe James Marshall wears throughout the whole movie. Nothing sneaky about it, by his own telling. He just didn't give them back. They stayed in his closet for the better part of 20 years. He told people in 2024 that they were in regular rotation until about 5 years ago, which means that Harrison Ford spent real-world occasions well into the 2010s dressed as a fictional commander-in-chief. The line stuck around too. Ford has admitted that he still drops Get Off My Plane now, and then he flies. So, as he puts it, the opportunity comes up more than you think. It's the line that he quotes most out of his entire career, and it's never really left him. And there are a lot of good lines that Harrison Ford says. I mean, come on. But there is a darker footnote. In 2015, Ford's vintage Ryan trainer lost power right after takeoff from Santa Monica, and he had to put it down on the Piner Golf Course in Venice. He came out of it banged up, but alive. There's no record of what he said on the way down, but if anyone had earned the right to use the line, I'd say it was the guy in the cockpit. Number 5. Ford fought the MPAA and broke the record anyway. Ford wanted a PG-13, and he had a reason to think that he could get one. He pulled exactly this move a few years earlier on Clear and Present Danger, leaning on the MPAA until an R came down to a PG-13, which opened the doors to every parent and teenager in America. So he went back to the ratings board and made the case himself. This time, they didn't budge. The film stayed R. It opened on July 25th of 1997 to a huge $37.1 million weekend and rode that all the way to the 5th biggest movie of the year. What the board wouldn't get past wasn't language. It was the violence. Hostages shot at point-blank range, a death threat pointed at the president's young daughter, and a body count that keeps climbing. None of that is the kind of thing that you could trim with just a bleep. It's the movie doing the exact job it was built to do. You sand off those edges for a family crowd and sure you're open wider, but now you've made a softer and really a worse film. So Ford lost the argument. The board was right that the content earned its R, and the R-rated movie went out and beat everything in front of it. Anyway, number 4. The entire soundtrack was replaced in 2 weeks. Ran. D.Y. Newman, the guy behind The Natural and Short People and more Pixar songs than you can count, wrote and recorded the full orchestral score for Air Force One. The whole thing, every cue, roughly 2 hours of action music. But then Peterson threw it in the trash. His problem wasn't the quality. He thought it just sounded like a parody of an action movie instead of a real thing. Bootlegs of those cues float around online. And the YouTube comments, they don't show mercy. One often quoted line compares the hijacking music to a fight between Peter Griffin and the Big Chicken, which isn't the energy that you want under the scene where Gary Oldman executes the National Security Advisor. So they called in Jerry Goldsmith, who maybe had 2 weeks to save the whole soundtrack. A job this size normally runs a month or more. To make the deadline, Goldsmith pulled in Joel McNeely to help carry portions of it off his themes and the big brassy state occasion at 30,000-foot score that everyone remembers. Well, that got hammered out in about 12 days of pure crisis. Newman quietly filed his rejection version away and then later mined it for parts and reused some of it in Toy Story 3. So a score that a director once called too cartoonish for a thriller eventually found a home in an actual cartoon. One that swept Newman an Oscar that year. And the Oscar goes to applause, Let Me See, Randy Newman for We Belong Together. Whether that's poetic justice or just Hollywood recycling depends entirely on how you feel about Randy Newman, which is probably more complicated than you walked in expecting. Number 3. The U.S. Navy scrambled jets to intercept a movie prop. That stunt 747 got a reported $300,000 paint job to turn it into Air Force One. The powder blue nose, the darker stripe down the side, United States of America, and big block letters, the flag on the tail. It's one of the more recognizable paint schemes on the planet. Slapped onto a 747 and flown around like nobody would notice. Well, people noticed. Parked at Los Angeles International, it was convincing enough that bystanders called it in, certain that the president had quietly rolled into town. But then it got airborne, and a pair of FA-18 pilots got scrambled to identify an unexplained target in the sky. They pulled up alongside and found, in the words of the 747's own pilot, what looked like Air Force One full of bullet holes. The holes were decals. Air traffic control sorted it out and confirmed that the thing was a movie prop, and the fighters peeled off and went home. So, a rented cargo jet in costume managed for at least a few minutes to fool the exact people whose entire job is knowing what's in the air. Number 2. Oldman used the villain's paycheck to make his masterpiece. Mann took the Korsanov role for one reason. Money. Not for a boat, though. He needed it to fund a movie that he'd been preparing for his whole life. A film called Kneel by Mouth. He wrote it, he directed it, and he pulled it straight out of his own childhood in working-class South London. The drinking, the violence, the kind of damage that gets passed down a family without anyone ever saying its name out loud. Luc Besson came aboard to produce and put up part of the budget. Oldman covered the rest by remortgaging his house. The man bet his actual home on it. It premiered in competition at Cannes in 1997. Kathy Burke won Best Actress there for playing Val, a woman trapped in a brutal marriage. It went on to win Baptistas for the Best British Film and Best Original Screenplay. Oldman said that the script took him about 3 weeks to write and a lifetime to be ready to write. Then there's America. In the United States, Neil Bymouth grossed $266, $130 total. Oldman's payday on an $85 million studio action film was many times that. The most personal thing he ever put on film earned less across the entire country than a busy multiplex polls in over one ordinary weekend. On the award circuit and back home in Britain, it was a genuine event. But in the country whose blockbuster paid for it, almost nobody saw it, including myself. I haven't watched that one yet. I'll put it on my list. And as a use of one paycheck, though it's remarkably efficient. The rest of it, in America, at least kind of stings. Number 1. Gary Oldman's real birthday has been in every viewing since 1997. There's a piece of the real Gary Oldman tucked into the film, and it's been there in every print, every disc, every streaming copy since opening weekend. Almost nobody catches it. Early on, Koronov moves through a security checkpoint carrying forged identity papers. The credentials that get the terrorists waved aboard as a harmless news crew. It's on screen for a blink. You're watching faces and counting threats. You're not reading a prop, but fans who paused it point to the date of birth printed on that document. March 21st, 1958. That's not a random number that a set designer made up. That's Gary Oldman's actual birthday. Somebody, props, design, or the man himself slipped the actor's real birth date into a document whose entire job is to prove the guy holding it is somebody else. Slipping a little inside info into fake paperwork is an old set tradition, a quiet signature on the work. This one, though, it hits differently. Koronov boards under a false name with false papers hiding everything true about who he is. And the one genuinely real thing on that forgery belongs to the man playing him. And there you have it, everyone. 15 weird facts about Air Force One. Which one landed the hardest? Drop it in the comments. And if you're not subscribed yet, unlike the Defense Secretary, we're not invoking any amendments to force the issue. But yeah, just hit the like button. And until next time, it's your turn to be afraid. This is Remember When.